Each of us discovered from the other that we had set ourselves to the same life task, to strive for the awakening of that true culture which would be enlivened and penetrated by the ideal of humanity, and to guide and hold men to the goal of becoming truly intelligent, thinking beings. My meeting with Rudolf Steiner, Albert Schweitzer. It is not sufficient today to reveal the facts of spiritual reality by recounting the great teachings of the past. The time has come when men and women must advance toward direct knowledge of the supersensible world by developing their latent faculties of spiritual perception in full rational consciousness. The rise in the last 3 centuries of logical thinking and of the scientific spirit of observation has been a necessary step in human evolution toward a rediscovery at a higher level of the spiritual background of the universe. Author A.P. Shepard gives us not only an excellent biography of one of the greatest thinkers of the 20th century, but also an introduction to the heart of spiritual science, or anthroposophy, the life work of Rudolf Steiner. By applying scientific methods to his examination of the spiritual world, Rudolf Steiner brought us a workable means by which reincarnation, karma, the Christian mysteries, initiation, and both Eastern and Western esoteric traditions are synthesized into a path open to the intelligence of modern men and women. Steiner's spiritual vision penetrated the practical side of the human condition and generated a new form of medicine and biodynamic agriculture, a highly successful, spiritually based therapy for retarded children, a school of art and architecture, as well as the worldwide Waldorf system of education. An understanding of Rudolf Steiner's spiritual science offers the reader a powerful tool for self-unfoldment and a practical system for improving and mastering daily life. Inner Traditions International Limited. Rudolf Steiner, Scientist of the Invisible. A Biography by A.P. Shepard. Foreword by Owen Barfield. Foreword. More than a quarter of a century has elapsed since the first publication of this book, whose one aim, as the author observes in his preface, was to break down the barrier of ignorance and indifference that conceals from the majority of English people the teaching of Rudolf Steiner. Since that date, certain changes have occurred in the situation it was designed to meet. On the one hand, the general confidence in a positivist or reductionist view of reality has eroded a little further. On the other, the barrier of ignorance and indifference is a little less compacted than it was. But in both cases, it is only a little, much too little, to make A Scientist of the Invisible a less important book than it was at the time of its first appearance, though enough to justify expectation of its reaching a wider public than the first edition could hope to achieve. When I began lecturing in American universities in 1964, I used to encounter educated men who had never even heard the name of Rudolf Steiner. Then, years later, this no longer happened. Such books as Theodore Roszak's Where the Wasteland Ends, Fridtjof Capra's The Tao of Physics, Morris Berman's The Reenchantment of the World, Trevor Levere's Poetry Realized in Nature, to name only a few I happen to have read in the last 10 years, are perhaps only straws in the wind, but the wind of change is real enough to have lifted them. The truth is that many more minds are opening to the realization that an altogether new way of thinking is desperately needed. Unfortunately, Not many of them are untrammeled enough to realize also that a new way of thinking is likely to reveal a new and unfamiliar world. They overlook the simple, if annoying, fact that if its consequences were not unfamiliar and therefore at first encounter shocking, it would not be a new way of thinking. Only the old one in a grand new dress. It is this inability or refusal to control impatience long enough to let in study and reflection that appears to be responsible for the blindness of the Western world to what concerns it so nearly. Most people who are at all well acquainted with Steiner's writings, and known to be so, have experienced more than once what it is to be asked, "Where shall I begin?" by someone in whom the indifference has begun to weaken, while the ignorance is still total. Many of them will have had, like me, a helpless feeling about replying because of the enormous variety and scope of those writings and reported lecture cycles, not to speak of the ever-increasing volume of anthroposophical literature being produced by his followers. There may perhaps be some special interest or knowledge in the inquirer which makes it appropriate to refer to him, to a particular book or lecture cycle by Steiner himself. If so, all the better. Where there is not, it may well be wiser for him to read in the first place something about the Austrian seer and philosopher, what he set out to do, what he did, and the consequences that have begun to flow from it. For such a purpose, it is difficult to imagine a better book than this one. It is so unassuming, so thorough for all its brevity, so workmanlike. There is, moreover, in the manner of presentation, that extra tinge of authority, based on ingrained conviction, which can color, without their willing it, the utterance of those who have found in spiritual science some truth they had discovered for themselves before they encountered it. It reads smoothly and consecutively enough, but it must have been a formidable task to combine in some 200 pages a not inadequate account of, first, the method of spiritual science, or, to give it its other name, anthroposophy, and the substance of its findings at the date of Steiner's death. Secondly, its application in numerous practical activities, and thirdly, the life and character of the man Rudolf Steiner. It is a task in which I feel Canon Shepherd succeeded. Anyone reading the contents page will notice that I have changed the order in which these three separate but allied subjects are dealt with. I am now going to go further and suggest to any reader coming quite fresh to it all that he adopts yet a third order in his perusal. After the first two chapters, I would recommend him to go on to chapters 16 and 17, the application, to continue with chapters 9 to 15, or, if he has little interest in the churches, 9 to 14, and to conclude with 3 to 8 on Steiner himself and the Anthroposophical Society. I hope it is a sensible suggestion. I do not think the fate of the book depends on its being adopted, but it might hasten its impact. And that, I believe, is something that is badly needed. As the result of a good many years of increasing, though still painfully inadequate penetration into the vastness and depth of Steiner's legacy, and of anxious reflection on it, I have become convinced of this, that the future of civilization depends more than anything else on its willingness or unwillingness to make of that legacy the kind of use which its nature demands. A use different in mode, but not less abiding than the use that was made by an earlier age of the legacies of Pythagoras and Aristotle. I can only hope, therefore, that this book, by achieving a deservedly wide circulation, will help to shame the impatience and compel the study and reflection. Owen Barfield, South Darenth, Kent, November 1982.